Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1092 just came out, and this was the first chapter in a long time that I actually didn't enjoy that much. And I'm gonna get to the main reason for why that is in a second. It mainly has to do with Luffy and how his fight with Kizaru began. And no, this is not a power scaling issue like, oh, Luffy should beat him easily because he's an admiral, or oh, Kizaru's an admiral so he should be doing better or something like that. It's not about that. It's one singular issue that has become a recurring issue throughout this arc ever since we left Onigashima, and I'm going to get to that in a second. Before we get to that, I just want to say that there are many parts of this chapter that I did enjoy, namely the interactions that we got between Kizaru and the various characters, and particularly how Kizaru seems to be developing as a character. I have a whole video coming out on this on Tuesday because I think Kizaru may be about to surprise us by turning out to be maybe one of One Piece's most complex characters. I think I've been seeing a lot of great stuff, or at least great potential from him between the last four chapters since 1089, since we cut back to Egghead Island. So I'm really excited for Kizaru. He kept up, I think, the direction that I was hoping that his character would go with this chapter, with a lot of little comments talking about how he doesn't want to kill Vegapunk, how he is torn with what he is doing right now. Again, I'm going to expand on a lot more of that with next video that's coming out on this Tuesday. The other thing that I really thought was cool was, we've seen throughout Egghead Island this emphasis on the idea of dreams, and dreams being really important. The phrasing towards the end of this chapter before the robot woke up was very specific, in that they kept referring to the robot that was destroyed, the Vegapunk robot, as the robot of dreams. The robot of dreams was destroyed. Essentially, Kizaru destroyed their hopes and dreams, right? And then Luffy, who himself, in Gear 5th in particular, is symbolic of dreams, of freedom, right? I mean, we had that whole Vegapunk explanation breaking down what devil fruits are, and basically using Luffy's devil fruit as the poster child of the idea that devil fruits themselves are dreams. They're based on the power of dreams and imagination. So we have, as Kizaru is giving this speech about how, you know, the robot of dreams, your dreams were crushed, etc., we have Luffy just bursting back in Gear 5th form, basically the embodiment of hopes and dreams, grabbing Kizaru and just kind of almost representative of the power of dreams that still exists, that Kizaru did not in fact crush. And then at the same time, we have that robot waking up. So I feel like there's a tie in there somewhere, and I want to give shoutouts to, I believe it was Hidden Island. I should have double checked. It might have been Parvision, but I believe it was Hidden Island who put out a video, I think the greatest emu theory ever, about the power of dreams and that potentially being a power source, something like that. I'm probably butchering the concept of the video, but that's roughly how I remember it. I might be remembering it totally wrong. But it's interesting that might have something to do with what powered the robot. So I don't have any good theories on what powered the robot, but I just like the symbolism of the end of that chapter with the robot of dreams being destroyed and then Luffy bursting back in, and the emphasis on dreams throughout this chapter. So I think that we're gonna get some greater insight into where Oda's going with the theme of dreams in general by the end of Egghead Island. Kuma at Marijua, I don't have a lot to say personally, because for me, I thought that scene was leading to something more, especially if Kuma has left Marijua, because to me, the power of seeing Kuma hit the bottom of the red line and then actually climb up it, you know, hand after fist, basically just climbing up and scaling the red line. That's some very powerful imagery. I just wish it had led to a more dramatic scene. So we still don't know exactly the direction that's going. It almost felt like we off-screened a lot of the impact that Kuma had in Marijua. And I thought some sort of a more meaningful interaction with the Celestial Dragons might have been in the works there, but it's clear that there's something more important that Kuma is driving towards. So scaling the red line, confronting the Celestial Dragons, turns out that wasn't the point of his story. So there's something more that's happening there. Akainu's part, we're going to get to that towards the end of this, because there's a particular submission from the community of patrons that I got, the voice of the people, that I want to talk about. So we're just going to talk about Luffy versus Kizaru here. Luffy versus Kizaru. Okay, the main issue that I have is Luffy not using Advanced Conqueror's Haki. Now, the reason I have this issue is because, yes, I understand that the hero is generally not going to use their trump card right away. That's just shonen rules. That makes sense. However, the key difference is that Luffy does clearly quickly jump to Gear 4th, and he jumps to Gear 5th. You know, he does that without any sort of thought to it, right? He'll jump to these higher level techniques and abilities, but he won't use Advanced Conqueror's Haki. And the weird thing is, those techniques, Gear 4th, using Gear 4th drains he has a hard timer on how long he can use Gear 4th, right? That was constant and consistent as of the Onigashima fight, as of the rooftop battle. He has a time limit as to how long he can use it. And once he's done using it, he's drained of being able to use Haki or fight, or being able to fight at all for a long period of time. Gear 5th, same thing. It's a very draining technique that pushes his body really hard, and as soon as he's done using it, he's completely unable to fight for a long period of time. These are two very, very draining, very taxing, very last resort sort of abilities that leave him basically incapacitated afterwards, right? These are abilities with severe drawbacks and time limits. Advanced Conqueror's Haki is something that Luffy was able to freely use against Kaido for like 50 straight chapters in Onigashima. I might be exaggerating there a little bit, but essentially the time span that it took for all of the Straw Hats to defeat the Tobiroppo and the Calamities and Lon Kid to beat Big Mom, basically for everything else to happen in Onigashima, during that time span, Luffy was using Advanced Conqueror's Haki against Kaido. Perfectly fine, right? He can use that stuff for a long time, on top of then using it with Gear 4th towards the end of the Kaido fight, and then on top of then using it again with Gear 5th during the Kaido fight. Advanced Conqueror's Haki is clearly something that Luffy can use in base form with far less repercussions, and frankly, it's the most powerful ability in the world, right? Gear 4th, Gear 5th, that stuff is great, phenomenal. It is great to use on top of Advanced Conqueror's Haki to really push Luffy over the edge against, as we saw against Kaido, Gear 5th pushed him over the edge, right? But Advanced Conqueror's Haki is kind of what gets him there in the first place. That's what gets him to that Yonko level sort of, sorry if I used a power scaling term there, but the general level where you're able to split the sky and box with Kaido and stuff like that, that crazy high level, the same thing that Kaido was one-shotting Luffy with in Act 1. That's the special sauce, and the crazy thing is, compared to Gear 4th and Gear 5th, Advanced Conqueror's Haki is so much less taxing for Luffy to use. He can use it way longer, has almost no repercussions that we've seen. We know that Haki does drain your energy gradually, that was established in Whole Cake Island, but we've never actually seen that be a problem ever in a fight. It's Gear 4th that really drains Luffy and we've seen him exhausted from that, and Gear 5th that really drains Luffy and we see him exhausted from that. Using Haki, Armament, Future Sight, Advanced Conquerors, it's literally never been a drawback for Luffy in a fight. So, long explanation leading to, there is just no reason for Luffy to be jumping to Gear 4th and Gear 5th, which are essentially extremely high risk, much lower reward abilities, without first using Advanced Conqueror's Haki, which is an extremely high reward, very low risk ability. So when I say that yes, most shonen heroes, they slowly dial up to their trump card, that's true, but that's because for pretty much all situations, the author writes in the simple story logic that using that trump card, your final strongest ability, that's the most taxing for the hero, right? It requires the most effort. One Piece right now, Luffy doesn't have that. Advanced Conqueror's Haki is something he can use in base easily, right? Gear 4th, Gear 5th, that's the taxing stuff, but Oda's having him jump to using that instead of starting off with the simple thing that's really, 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 really strong first. You see what I'm saying? There's just no story reason not to be using Advanced Conqueror's Haki to begin with. It just doesn't exist. So the standard shonen logic of like, okay, well, I'll eventually get to my highest effort, strongest ability doesn't work here, because Luffy's strongest ability is a really low effort ability that he has no reason to not just break out from the start. And now you might be saying, look, Morge, we're only a chapter into the fight. Why does it matter? Who cares? You're nitpicking. It is not one chapter that I'm referring to. It is a full arc. Throughout Egghead Island, this has become a trend. So now I'm finally speaking on it, which is why it seems like, yeah, maybe it looks like a nitpick or something like that, but I'm finally addressing a broader trend that I've kind of just been trying to ignore for some time, and been making up some headcanon to excuse in my head for some time, right? Luffy versus Lucci. It's like, okay, cool. He doesn't use Advanced Conqueror's Haki there. He could probably one-shot Lucci with Advanced Conqueror's Haki if he wanted to. He chose not to use it because it's a low-stakes fight, right? Lucci's so weak, why not just use Gear 5th? We don't need to break out Advanced Conqueror's Haki. Use Gear 5th, it's fun for Luffy. Mess around with Lucci for a bit, have fun, beat him up anyway. It doesn't matter. No consequences. Cool, right? That's why he didn't use it there. That's my headcanon, right? And I think it fits. Then the Seraphim. this is when you start rolling your eyes a little bit, because we get like 3 chapters in a row of Luffy being like, I can't hurt these Seraphim, it's so hard, why can't I hurt these Seraphim? Like, you're as strong as Kaido, this is so difficult, we're so stuck, it's so difficult for us to beat these Seraphim, how are we gonna beat the Seraphim? We get this for like 3 chapters. This is where, again, suspension of disbelief is kind of, I'm really having to headcanon some stuff here. It's like, okay, well, Luffy's probably not using Advanced Conqueror's Haki here because they probably know that there's a bigger fight around the corner or whatever with the Marines coming up, so maybe just don't use it here, maybe just, maybe save your Haki for later or something like that. Cool, whatever. And then finally you get to Kizaru, and it's like, okay, this is not for fun, right? Luffy clearly views Kizaru as a very serious opponent, a very big threat. There's no reason to be saving your Advanced Conqueror's Haki anymore or anything like that. Why in the world would Luffy begin his fight with Gear 4th Snake Man without Advanced Conqueror's Haki? It's just bizarre. It's just absolutely bizarre. And then when that doesn't work, he switches to Gear 5th, but he just, why would he ever be attacking Kizaru with Snake Man with just no usage of the actual ability that makes Luffy's Snake Man attacks, potent against these top tiers, as we saw in Onigashima? It's just plot-induced stupidity is the term that is commonly used in comic book forums and comic book discussions, and it's generally viewed as basically the worst type of writing that tends to afflict these type of stories. Plot-induced stupidity when characters just straight up don't use very, very straightforward, simple abilities purely for the sake of manufacturing, I suppose, extra stakes or tension. That's the thing. If it's been the case for a little bit and it's starting to grow and become a trend in Luffy's fights, if it feels like, to me, we're at a point where, okay, Oda's just decided Advanced Conqueror's Haki is too good of an ability, so he's just going to arbitrarily have Luffy forget it. It's just the poorest form of writing, and it's something that is, again, used heavily as criticism throughout the comic book industry, is basically like, yeah, that's basically some of the dumbest stuff that can be written. I don't want to see that happen, and I would love to see Oda either just be able to give Luffy opponents consistently that would warrant Luffy using Advanced Conqueror's Haki, but how often are we going to have to see this where basically we have to pretend for chapters on end that Luffy can't beat the Seraphim or the Seraphim are an actual problem or something like that because the character is just being written to forget a straightforward ability that they have? I don't think that's good. I think in generally any form of literature, whatever writing, if you can only manufacture a conflict or stakes or tension by making the character conveniently forget or just randomly, arbitrarily not use straightforward abilities that they have, and that's the only way to actually create a conflict or pretend that there's stakes, I think that that's a problem. So, yes, I might be making a big deal out of it, but again, it's something that's just been there. And I'm thinking that it might go beyond just Luffy, because even just one arc back with Garp and Aokiji, Garp opens up his assault on the island with a huge, what seems like Advanced Conqueror's Haki attack, Galaxy Impact. Then he's fighting Aokiji, and stuff like, he's not doing anything like that at all. Why? Is it because Aokiji wouldn't be able to deal with something like that? Like, what's the reason? I mean, we saw that Aokiji's ice can't freeze Garp, so does Oda then have to nerf Garp and just not have him use Galaxy Impact or anything like that for the rest of the Aokiji fight, just so that Advanced Conqueror's Haki doesn't break the fight and have Garp win too easily or something? It's hard to say, and I'm not trying to insult, Aokiji or Kizaru here or anything like that and say like, oh, they wouldn't be able to handle that, but to me it's more just like, why isn't the author showing us whether they can or not? Why treat these admirals with kid gloves? It just feels like a very artificial sense of conflict in both these cases when one character is basically fighting with kid gloves. So that being said, hopefully next chapter Luffy is using Advanced Conqueror's Haki. Hopefully this is the last time we have that sort of situation, because maybe in the future Luffy's opponents will all be like Shanks, Blackbeard, Kainu, Imu, characters that Luffy would just use his actual strengths right off the bat instead of arbitrarily just holding off the straightforward, easy, super powerful ability that he could call upon right away for the end for no real reason when it is nowhere near as taxing as Gear 4th or Gear 5th. I don't know. Maybe next chapter again, Luffy breaks it out. Maybe Luffy even has an explanation and it just addresses everything I said here, and it's just like a new reason for why Oda just wouldn't have a character use their best Haki ability right off the bat and instead have them use the stamina draining Gear 4th and Gear 5th without Advanced Haki first. I don't know. Hopefully that happens next chapter. That'd be great. There is the other possibility, which is just Luffy has been using Advanced Conqueror's Haki this entire fight. In which case, that would check off my concern that, Oda's having Luffy randomly forget that ability, but open up a whole new box of problems, which is then we can never actually tell when a character is using Advanced Conqueror's Haki or not. Was Luffy using it against the Seraphims, does that mean, and it just wasn't working? Was Luffy using it against Lucci, and Lucci's just on the same level, and Lucci can also use Advanced Conqueror's Haki? Like, if Luffy's if all those Snake Man attacks had Advanced Conqueror's Haki, then it's just like, we have no idea ever when Luffy's using it, and it actually makes us look at everything Luffy's done throughout Egghead Island and be like, okay, so the Seraphim are basically top tier, Lucci is basically top tier. None of this makes sense anymore, so let's hope that that's not the case, that Luffy's been using it. I've seen some people say that Gear 5th was established during the Kaido fight to always be using Advanced Conqueror's Haki. I went back and reread the quote. I don't think that that's what that quote means at all. It just means that in that moment, Luffy is leaking Conqueror's Haki, which he tends to do in general in many other situations outside of the Onigashima fight. And if Luffy in Gear 5th is always using Advanced Conqueror's Haki, then again, that would mean that he was using it against Lucci, which means that Lucci can clash evenly with an Advanced Conqueror's Haki user, meaning Lucci is an Advanced Conqueror's Haki user, which again makes no sense and would mean that Lucci is way stronger than we thought. So again, I just don't think that makes sense unless you think Luffy was using Advanced Conquerors against Lucci. So all of that annoying power system, nitpicky stuff, I suppose, stuff out of the way, let's hear from the voice of the people, because there was something particularly interesting that stood out to me. So this is from Chiniwa Alabatia, who says, Akainu's dialogue to Kuma felt like it was also about him. They're both puppets to the Celestial Dragons and have to do their biddings. Akainu is forced to as Fleet Admiral, whereas Kuma is a slave of theirs who was forced to come back and has been turned into a shell of himself. That is very interesting, because I'll be honest, I did not read too much into Akainu's dialogue with Kuma there. Some people are saying that it seemed like Akainu and Kuma were former allies or friends, or Akainu felt sentimental over it. I think maybe I'll wait for the Viz translation. I didn't feel that much. I might have missed something there. But the idea that it reflects Akainu's own perception of himself, or kind of lampshading what Akainu himself is, kind of the role that he's kind of fallen into, I think that is a very, very interesting idea. And I am definitely looking forward to the Viz translation of that exchange to see if that is something that is very intentional. Because Akainu is one of the characters that I'm looking forward to exploring the most out of all the characters in One Piece. So the idea that the setup for what his potential character conflict, or the depth of what's actually going to be expanded upon in the future, hopefully in the final war, is already, the groundwork for that is already being laid, the seeds are already being planted. That's very exciting stuff for me, because I hope that this is one character that gets a tremendous amount of development and focus by the end of it all. So great contribution, and yeah, that is all for this video. I will talk to you all later.